Recording.
Sorry, I clicked the wrong button. Now, go
That's
ahead.
okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for that introduction, Marnie. Like Marnie said, my name's Annie Waite. And today we are all going to have the pleasure of learning from Kim and Valerie about seed collection and propagation and how we can all get involved in growing native plants for Ohio's forests. So we're really excited to get to share this with you today. Before we get going, I'm going to give a little bit of introduction. See if it'll let me switch to the next slide. Come on. There. Oh, too far. Okay, there we go. All right, so to preview today's presentation, Kim's going to give us all a little context about what a seed bank is and why this kind of work is important. And then she and Valerie are going to take us through the entire process of sourcing, collecting, storing, and propagating seed. And if you are new to collecting native seed, this might feel like a lot of information. It might feel like it's a little bit overwhelming, and that is okay. Our goal with this presentation is to give you all a sense of the kind of considerations that go into sourcing and propagating native seed, and what is being done at the seed bank here at the Arboretum. And then at the end, Kim is going to give you all some examples of things that you can try at home if you're interested in doing this as well as a few other things or resources if you are curious about getting involved in this kind of work. All right. So like Marnie said, we are coming to you from Holden Forest and Gardens, and that's an organization that's made up of two campuses. We have the Cleveland Botanical Garden, which is closer to downtown Cleveland. And then 25 miles east, we have the Holden Arboretum, which is where Kim and Valerie and I work. And together, these two institutions welcome thousands of visitors every year to experience beautiful trails and horticultural displays. There's also a pretty robust research department. We have a lot of really cool research happening here, as well as over 3,000 acres of natural areas that are stewarded by our conservation department. And there's also lots of programming and education that happens year-round for community members. So please do pay us a visit if you're ever up in Northeast Ohio. We would love to have you. And this organization, this is our mission. We seek to connect people with the wonder, beauty, and value of trees and plants in order to inspire action for healthy communities. And part of that goal, come on. There we go. Part of that mission is what we call the Working Woods Hub. So Kim, Valerie, and I are part of this. The Working Woods Hub is a network of passionate educators, scientists, and natural resource professionals who are working together to connect with landowners and empower people to manage, protect, and create resilient forests in Northeast Ohio and hopefully beyond. Hopefully throughout the state and the rest of our region. And this project began in 2018 as a 67-acre demonstration forest that has different plots that are managed in different ways so people can come and visit and see what happens if you take out invasives or if you open up the canopy, things like that. But we were lucky enough to receive a lot of funding in the past year that allowed us to expand and expand our outreach and expand our offerings, basically. So this is a screenshot from our website, so you can see how this all fits together. We have lots of different things that we're able to offer at this point. You can see we have resources for landowners or people who are interested in forest stewardship. We've got lots of events and programs. We employ 2 consulting foresters now who are able to work one-on-one with landowners to give them advice on what they can do. to increase the resilience of their woods. And then, of course, we have the physical demonstration forest and the seed bank. And all of these are under that same grant that I mentioned, and they all work together with in that goal of creating resilient forests in this area. So at this point, I'm going to pass it on to Kim so she can explain a little bit more about the seed bank and how that connects to forest stewardship. It's all you, Kim.
Thank you. Okay, let's see if I have control over this presentation. I think so. Perfect. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having us. Annie, thank you for introducing us and for introducing Holden and the seed bank. Right here on your guys' screen is the first black walnut seedling that our seed bank team has grown from seed. And the reason I'm kind of starting off with this slide is this is one of the first seeds that we collected, processed, safely stored for a very short amount of time before we stratified it, and then finally sowed it. And this is the first emergence of our black walnut seedling. This is hopefully the first seedling of many thousands of seedlings to come from the entire seed bank facility. And I do want to note, this is not Holden's first black walnut, but this is the seed bank's first black walnut. So it felt like a pretty monumental, exciting moment in time. I want to take the next few moments to tell you guys a little bit about the why of what we're doing at Holden Seed Bank and some of the issues that we are hoping to address. Let's see. There we go. All right, so as some of us may know, reforestation is the #1 natural solution to aid in capturing carbon. It has been scientifically proven that trees have the capacity and the ability to capture excess carbon from the atmosphere and then store that in its accumulated growth year after year and after year. And so, therefore, planting trees is one of the best things that we can do right here, right now, as we face a warming climate moving forward. Interestingly enough, there was, let me see if I can pull up my notes to make sure I get all the details correct. There was a reforestation opportunity analysis performed by Susan Cook Patton in 2020. And she and her team of researchers estimate that there are over 133 million acres of reforestation potential in the contiguous US. And I think that's a really fascinating number one, because it's huge. But number two, this is actually previously forested land. And so 133 acres remain available for reforestation. You'll notice that the Northeast and the Midwest specifically are coming in second place, so to speak, just behind the southern states, which I find to be pretty fascinating. Okay, of those potential acres, 114 million acres are owned by private landowners, which again, as I considered who I was speaking to today, I'm thinking about all of the woodland owners in Northeast Ohio or in the state of Ohio at large. And a lot of the land that's available for reforestation is privately owned by folks like yourselves. Which is really exciting. That means there's a lot of opportunity to work together on resilient forest management in some capacity. Scaling down to us right here in the state of Ohio, according to the Reforestation Hub, which is a really unique and exciting resource provided by the Nature Conservancy and American Forests. According to their most recent statistics, Ohio has up to 4.62 million acres of reforestation opportunity. Reforesting that much acreage, they estimate, would take about 2.5 billion trees. In order to have 2.5 billion trees, we need double that in readily available wild collected seed. And as we'll go into this a little bit more, there's an entire process from start to finish, from collecting seeds and then processing them and storing them and then growing them into plants to be planted in your forested spaces. As you can imagine, that whole entire process is many, many months. And there are a lot of things that can go wrong, so to speak, throughout that time. So to plant 2.5 billion trees, we probably need double that in seed to account for all of the issues that could arise, like mortality at any given moment. Interestingly enough, though, we currently do not have that amount of seed readily available in our hands for planting. And so right now we are working really hard at the Holden Seed Bank to try to address that issue. So our mission, our goal, is to supply native seeds for regional restoration in Northeast Ohio and beyond. So that means that we are really focusing on a few different things here. Yes, we want to make sure that we have a well-stocked seed bank facility. We want wild collected seed of local ecotype to try to address this issue that we don't have enough in our region. But also what we have found over the last few years is that, where was I going with this? I got a little distracted there for a second. What we have found over the last few years is that one of the most important things that we can do with this facility is also to build this network of important stakeholders around the seed bank. And so, yes, we can help collect seed, but really we have to be working statewide to facilitate and coordinate seed collections at large. It also is going to take a lot of work in said network between different organizations, different landowners. There's going to have to be different relationships made with government agencies for policy, so on and so forth. And so really, yes, we want to collect, process, store, redistribute native seeds for restoration, but also we really want to facilitate a regional network to help make all of this possible. One thing I will say before I pass it on to Valerie, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the entire collection process, is exactly what a seed bank is. A seed bank, hey Cincinnati, a seed bank is a facility that is used to safely store seeds. It is cold and it is dry inside. What's unique about the seed bank facility that we have on site is that we are identifying as a restoration seed bank, meaning we are going to take the same scientifically proven practices of a dry and cold storage facility, and we are going to scale up and scale out to make sure that we can do our part to collect and store and redistribute as many different seeds as possible for regional restoration. So with that little introduction into why we're doing this, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Valerie, who is going to tell you a little bit more about the collection process and the storage process of native seeds.
All right. Thank you so much, Kim. I really appreciate that. As was mentioned, my name is Valerie. I am the Seed Bank and Administrative Specialist here at Holden. And I'm going to be talking to you all today about how the seed bank here really operates in depth to meet the needs of restoration. But we also want to see how these practices can apply to you to collect your own seed. What we really want to emphasize is that while the seed bank is its own facility, most of these practices can be carried out on much smaller scales. So as Kim mentioned, I mean, there's this whole process behind collecting and storing seeds, starting at seed sourcing all the way through forest restoration, if you look at the figure here on the screen. And it kind of does function as a cycle because the seeds that we ultimately end up outplanting into these forested environments can end up being seed sources someday for us and the purposes of collecting native local ecotype for restoration. Now, I say this word, I say native local ecotype, and what does that really mean? So that's where we start to get into our seed sourcing and the importance of knowing the origin of our plants. That's something that we think about a lot here at the seed bank for our purposes. And the meaning of local ecotype basically is just a genetically distinct group within a species that's adapted to a given environment. So all of the species, the plant species here in Ohio, are adapted to the environment that they're in and are not necessarily having the same adaptations for different environments. And that results in some slight genetic distinction from plants that could be the same species, but are growing in a different place. And so as plants are adapted to a given environment, so too are their seeds. And that's where the consideration really comes in for us. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in depth in this example here. So we're going to say that we have two northern red oaks, northern red oak 1 and northern red oak 2. And we're going to say these two are the same species, both of them function in the same way, both of them mast and produce these large fruits, these acorns. But the one thing that we don't know about them is where they're from. And so we're going to say for our purposes that Northern Red Oak 1 has been grown in Northeast Ohio, where Holden is based. And we'll say that Northern Red Oak 2 is growing somewhere in Maine. Now we can see that this is like a pretty significant distance between these two species, and we're looking at the potential for a really different environment. Latitudinally on the Earth, this is very different, and that can result in a lot of different adaptations for these plants. And so while they may be the same species, they may have slight genetic differences that somewhat differ them from one another. And that is where we get this function of ecotype. So our goal here at the Holden Seed Bank is to collect and propagate local ecotype seeds to ensure that the seed is adapted to our region. In addition to that, we have the added benefit of being able to preserve the naturally occurring genetic variation within our region of wild populations. So our emphasis is to ensure that the seed that we collect from is a wild population and not cultivated. Now, when we're talking about the rest of this phrase, about the rest of local ecotype, what does the local part of that really mean? I mean, is it that simple of like, if I drive up the street, it'll end up being completely different? Where does that line get drawn? And that's when we begin to talk about seed zones. So a seed zone is a region that has roughly the same topography and climate throughout. So the assumption is that the plants within a seed zone have the same adaptations or similar climate adaptations. And so this figure here demonstrates seed zones. It was published by Carolyn Pike in 2021, and it shows all of the seed zones that have been established throughout eastern United States. This data was compiled by taking plant hardiness zones and ecoregions and snapping them to the county level so that way we can nice and clearly see where these seed zone boundaries lie. And we can see that right off the bat, this is really quite diverse. I mean, in the state of Ohio alone, we have 4 different seed zones. And that just shows how these different climate adaptations and these subtle differences in environment can really end up changing the adaptations and origin of a seed. And so that's what the seed zone map is really meant to do. It's meant to standardize the way that we talk about seed origin in order to inform our practices and management. Sometimes the goal is to keep seed within the same seed zone and ensure that you're not distributing seed into an environment that it's not adapted to. Some practitioners would like to take seed and actually move it northward as rising temperatures make more southern, warmer environments not necessarily suitable for the same species. It just depends entirely on your purposes. And so that's something that we think about a lot here of ensuring that we are tracking seed origin as we source our seeds. And so we move on to the next step in the cycle of seed banking. Now that we've sourced our seeds and we know that we are collecting from wild populations, we want to make sure that we are considering a couple of things in the time of collection. The main things that we want to do is we want to make sure that we're collecting responsibly and that we are collecting all of the necessary data. So the first thing that I want to touch on is being responsible, or the ethics of seed collecting, because it's always important to make sure that we are collecting responsibly and ethically. So there are a couple of pieces of information that I wanted to go over. The first being that the seed that you collect belongs to the owner of the property on which seed is being collected. So even if you are the person that's doing all of the collecting and the managing and the general keeping of that seed afterwards and the growing of the plant, technically that seed does not belong to you if you didn't take it from your property, which is why it's really important to make sure that we have all of the appropriate permissions and permits prior to collecting. On Holden, we manage about 3,000 acres of primarily forested natural area, so we do have quite a bit of room to play around in. However, in order to maintain genetically diverse collections, we do have a desire to be able to collaborate with others and collect seed on other properties, so permitting and having the appropriate permissions is something that we think about a lot. Another point that I want to bring up is that we really aim to only collect seed from non-endangered and non-threatened plants currently. Plants that are endangered or threatened need their seed more than we do. They need to be able to maintain their own populations, which are likely isolated, in order to kind of grow and develop, and they need it more than we need it. So it's best to leave those be. We want non-endangered and non-threatened plants. And the other point that I want to bring up is we should only collect 20% of the available seed to ensure that we're collecting sustainably so that these populations can sustain themselves in the future. When we actually get into collecting seed, there are a couple of things that we need to broadly consider. And the first of those that I want to mention is conducting a site assessment. That generally happens prior to collection as a way to plan the collection. Once it becomes time to collect, we want to make sure we have all of the necessary field data. And once we have collected the seed, that we are handling it properly to ensure longevity after collection. So when we're looking at a site assessment, which again is ideally a preliminary trip that we make prior to collecting, just in an effort to locate populations and determine the number of individuals and seed available, it's also a really great way to inform when it's time to collect seed. So it's really important to make sure that you're properly identifying your target species and that you're assessing the population. We generally recommend that you should only collect seed if there are at least 50 to 100 individuals in that population, just to ensure that that's a sustainable population and that it's genetically diverse enough in collection. We also think that in site assessments, it's a great time to assess the collection readiness and the availability of seed. And this is where phenology is really going to come into play. Knowing if your plants you want to collect from have flowered or are currently flowering or are post-flower, all of that is going to inform when you come back to collect seed. So it's really helpful to determine those things so that way we can get the correct timing. And setting a collection limit. Again, I mentioned this number before of 20% of the available seed. We do not want to take all of the seed from these plants. And so we've got these two numbers here, this 50 to 100 individuals, but we also want only 20% of the available seed. And we want to make sure that we're having genetically diverse collections. So how do these numbers play into another? So because we want our collections to be local ecotype, but still have genetic diversity, we're going to take a look at this example to help explain how we should balance our 20% collection. So let's say, for the sake of this example, that we've got 5 flowers. Now we know now that we should have 50 to 100 at least, but for this example, we'll say 5. But we're only able to collect 20% of what's here. So technically, we could just collect seed from this one portion of the population, and that would technically meet those requirements. However, if we do that, we're only collecting the genetic information from this one individual, and that's not necessarily diverse. If we were to outplant that, we would just have the same genetic information all throughout, and that's not necessarily the most resilient, so it doesn't meet our goals. What we recommend doing is being able to collect a little bit from different points in the population, so that way we can still maintain diversity in our adapted seed collections. In terms of timing of seed collection, we recommend collecting around the time of natural dispersal. I want you all to think of like Goldilocks when we talk about when seed should be collected. We don't want our porridge too hot and we don't want our porridge too cold. And the same applies with seed. We don't want our seeds to be underdeveloped because then we risk the embryo not being fully developed, and that's not necessarily viable for our seed. We also don't want our seed to be overripe because that risks rapid degradation and is not ideal for long-term storage. We want to come back when our seed is exactly ripe, and that is why conducting a site assessment is really important, so that way you can get an understanding of where that plant is in development. When you're out collecting seed, there are generally 6 pieces of information that we look for on each collection. Not all of this may be relevant to other practices, depending on what your purposes are, but for us, these pieces of information are really critical. We want to know the location and who owns the land, the date that the seed was collected and who collected it. We also want to know the species name and the number of seeds present, so that way we can understand germination later on. And the GPS coordinates, which are really, really important. Tying it back to our initial discussion about seed origin, this is really the best, most effective way for us to understand where exactly seed was collected from. So the most important pieces of information are probably like the species, the date, and the GPS coordinates. There are quite a few different techniques that you can use to collect seed. A lot of that is going to depend on the type of seed that you're collecting, so it's important to be familiar with a few diverse types. The first kind that I want to talk about is hand picking, which is exactly as it sounds. You're just going up and literally picking the fruit off of your plant. This generally works well with plants that have like larger fruit, things that you could easily just pluck right off. Another method is pruning clusters, and this is something that's really helpful for plants that have like clusters of fruit or these clusters of flower heads, things like asters that are going to have like lots of different flower heads coming off, or I even think about like elderberry, these clusters of fruits. And that can be helpful just to take pruners and just clip off the whole bunch. Another method, which sounds a little funny, but it does work, is shaking branches of trees. Now, you do have to be a little bit careful with this one because you don't want to damage the mother plant at all. But it should be pretty easy because if we're following our method for timing of wanting to collect around the time of natural dispersal, then we should be able to kind of shake our seeds down with ease. Another technique is stripping seed heads. This is something that's really good and easy for like grasses, things that have these clusters of really small seeds that are on the ends of stems, and they're really easy to just pull right off. Bagging seed heads is one that generally I think about plants that have ballistic seed dispersal methods, which basically means that they have these kind of like fruits that end up actually rupturing in the forest and shooting seeds out across as a dispersal mechanism. So what we can do in those situations is actually put a bag around those seed heads before they pop. And then once they do, the seeds will just fall right into the bag. And that's a really efficient way to be able to collect seeds that use that sort of method. And the final technique I want to talk about is collecting from the ground, which is something that you can do, but it's not always the best thing to do. We say this because you don't necessarily know the origin of that seed. You don't know which specific plant it came from in its environment. And it also puts the seeds in the fruit at risk of being contaminated by pests. So it's not always the most ideal for a viable collection, but it can be done. These are just some pictures of seed collections that we've done here at the Holden Seed Bank. As you can see, it's a really simple, straightforward process. We're really lucky here at Holden to have a really robust volunteer program, and so they often come and assist us with seed collections, which is really fun and really exciting. And I see a lot of different methods here at play in these pictures. I see some people hand picking. I see some people in the bottom left actually pruning clusters of flowers and storing them in buckets. I also see just some seed storage occurring in these little bags just to take them back to process them. So it's really nothing super fancy. It's just being able to make sure that we're tracking the necessary information. And so once we collect our seed, how do we know if it's viable? I want to say that the short answer is that you don't necessarily, but there are a couple of ways that you can tell if the seed you collect is viable. The first one I want to talk about here is called a cut test, and it's exactly as it sounds. It's when you're taking your seed and actually cutting it in half to take a look at what's going on inside. This works better on larger fruits because it's more visible. So here in these pictures, we've got two cut tests done on acorns. And on the left side, we see this nice, clean tissue on the inside. And that's indicating that the acorn is healthy and that there's not any contamination or pest damage going on. And so that means that acorn and acorns from that collection are likely viable. Whereas on the right side, we can see that we have some weevil damage, which is quite common with acorns. So being able to take a subset of the seed that you collect and cut into them just to see what's happening can be really valuable just to take a look and see how that speaks to the quality of the rest of your collection. Another test that we use here is called a float test. And it is once again exactly as it sounds, where you're taking your seeds and quite literally just sticking them in a bunch of water to see what floats. Now, the idea here is that seeds that are technically considered not viable would be the ones that float. And the idea there is that there's air somehow getting inside the seed, and that likely means that the embryo is compromised. Now, I want to mention that these are not necessarily 100% accurate. We have sown seeds that floated and they did end up germinating and growing. But this is a good method to consider because it is non-destructive to the seed, whereas the cut test does destroy the seed. Some other resources that are really good to look into if you're interested in diving more into collection protocol. The Seeds of Success protocol was developed by the Bureau of Land Management. It's something that we reference often in our work, and it does a really good job of describing detailed, in-depth seed collection practices. I also wanted to mention the Project Wingspan seed collection protocol. It's based on the Seeds of Success protocol, but I find that it tends to be a little bit more, it's a little less technical, so sometimes that's a good one to rely on as well. And the Kew Botanic Gardens also have a lot of really good online resources talking about seed collection, and they're really good about like bringing the science into play with it. So just a couple of things if you're interested in looking more into collection protocol. All right, we've sourced our seed, we've collected our seed, and now it's time to get to seed storage. And this is kind of the key step here in this cycle of seed banking, because this is really the point where seed banks function as a seed bank. I mean, this is what we set out to do, to be able to store seed for a long period of time until it's ready to be used. And this is the part where it is critical that you take care of your seed, because everything that you do here is going to change the viability of your seed over time. And we want to make sure that we're keeping as much viable seed as possible. So right after you harvest your seed, we recommend that you process your seeds and remove as much excess plant matter as you can so that you just have the seed of your plant. And that's just a way to make sure that we are removing any excess moisture or excess sources of pests or pathogens that could compromise the longevity of that seed over time. Moisture is the enemy of keeping seed for an extended period of time. It's going to result in one of two things: molding or germination, both of which are bad for keeping seed as seed for a long time. And as Kim kind of mentioned earlier, the key to successfully storing seed is to keep them cold and dry. There's this principle that we utilize in seed banking called Harrington's rule of thumb that states that longevity of a seed will double for every 10% decrease in relative humidity and for every 5 degrees Celsius decrease in temperature. What does that mean? It means keep the seeds cold and dry. If there is only one aspect that you're able to control for humidity, because that is going to have a greater impact on longevity than the temperature will. And this is just what post-harvest handling looks like for us. We've got a lot of different methods that we use to clean up seed. Screening seed through sieves is something that we use to help separate the seed from the excess plant matter. And also in the top right, you can see an example of some fleshy fruit. We've got some spice bush there that has been actually taken apart from the like fleshy, pulpy fruit, so that way we can keep just the seed inside. And this is just, again, a way to make sure that we are eliminating any potential source of threat for our seed as we prepare to store it. Humidity and temperature control, as I mentioned, super important for keeping your seeds viable for a long time. And these are the conditions that we generally strive for, which are easy to mimic in your own home with some tools, and we'll show you that in a minute. Ambient conditions in the seed bank itself try to keep the temperature less than 25 degrees Celsius, and we say Celsius because technically we're scientists and that's what we're supposed to do, but 77 degrees Fahrenheit. And the relative humidity should be kept between 30 to 40%. Here in the seed bank, we try to keep our ambient humidity at the low end of that spectrum, usually around 32% relative humidity. And once the seeds end up in cold storage, we try to keep temperatures less than 5 degrees Celsius or 41 degrees Fahrenheit, and the humidity generally as low as possible, between 15 to 20%. And so this is all the fancy high tech that we use in the seed bank to make sure that we are maintaining these conditions. Here on the left, we've got our dehumidifier that keeps the humidity at the level that we need it to be. We also have a lot of these sensors around the seed bank that will tell us the humidity and temperature at any given point. And that just helps make sure that we are giving conditions that are conducive to keeping seed dry. Because once our seeds are done processing, we stick them on these trays and leave them to dry for about 1 to 2 weeks. And that generally ensures that the moisture content in the seed is low enough to not risk damage in storage. If we store our seed too quickly and don't dry it completely, and we just stick it right away in this cold or freezing environment, we have this sort of competing interaction where the surface level of our seed is going to kind of shrink, whereas water is one of those weird things that ends up expanding as it gets colder. And so when we have something expanding inside of something that's shrinking, we have the potential for some cell damage there, which is why drying our seeds is so important. But I also want to mention that what we do with our seeds is going to depend a lot on their seed storage behavior. Not all seeds are able to be stored in this manner. So it's really important that we do our research beforehand on the seed storage behavior associated with our species. So there are 3 main types that we're going to talk about. We'll talk about 2 in depth. And the first one I want to mention is orthodox. Orthodox seed storage behavior is the most common. Most species that you find demonstrate this behavior, and that means that they are tolerant of being dried and being kept cold. This is the seed storage behavior that is adept for being stored long term. Whereas a recalcitrant seed does not tolerate these conditions and has to be sown soon after collecting. The third type is intermediate, which means kind of a balance of these two. It's generally tolerant of being dry but not freezing, so you can keep these seeds for a short period of time but not long storage. I wanted to bring this up because it is a type of seed storage behavior, but it's not very common. Orthodox seeds are, again, super common, and it's going to be the thing you think of the most with seed storage and seed banking. So over here on the left, we have some ash seeds. These demonstrate orthodox behavior and are able to be dried and stored for an extended period. I also wanted to mention a lot of seeds. This is a native wildflower mix. A lot of our native wildflowers are able to be stored long term. So we've got some milkweed and ironweed and a black-eyed Susan, yellow coneflower, anything like that, generally is going to exhibit orthodox behavior. It means it's a good choice to store. Recalcitrant seeds I want to mention because one of our keystone major species that we work with for forest restoration are oak trees, and all oak trees are recalcitrant, which means that we cannot store them for years and years at a time. At most, once you harvest and process them and kind of try to keep them cool and fresh, you have probably about a 6-month window of viability to get them germinating and out the door. And so it's something that we consider a lot. It's really important to have your knowledge of seed storage behavior. And this is one of my favorite pictures that demonstrates the difference between our seed storage behaviors, because we've got both orthodox and recalcitrant seeds in the same picture. Here on the left-hand side, we have how we store Orthodox seeds here in the seed bank for an extended period of time. These seeds have been dried and processed, and we actually put them in these vacuum-sealed bags, and then we store them in the refrigerator. Whereas on the right, we've got our acorns, which have been kept cold and fresh. We can kind of see a little bit of condensation coming up on the bags. And this is just showing you really like the difference in how we handle our seeds depending on their behavior. And once our seeds are fully processed, they all end up here in the refrigerator. This is our ash collection here, and we have all of these seeds have been dried and processed, and we store them in these bins just to help keep them in a more controlled environment as they hunker down for long-term storage. And the final thing that I want to bring up with seed storage is that while proper storage is going to significantly increase the longevity of your seed, it ultimately will not last forever. We can see here in this figure that at a certain point through time, which will vary depending on your species, your survival of your seeds are going to eventually steeply drop off. And that's why here in seed banking, we really want to emphasize that when you collect a seed, it's important that that seed has an ultimate, a final destination in mind. So that way every seed has a purpose and has an end date of storage so that it'll eventually be grown, because that's our end goal, right? In the cycle of seed banking. And that's when we get into propagation. So to start this topic, I'm going to talk a little bit about our pre-germination treatments that we do here, and then I'm going to pass it back to Kim, who's going to talk to you about all the different methods of propagation. So pre-germination treatments, when I talk about that, I'm generally referring to the process of scarification and stratification. These are both processes that are used to kind of break the dormancy of seeds to allow them to germinate. We're going to talk about both a little bit, starting with scarification, which is going to be the process of breaking the outer protective coat of a seed to facilitate germination. And stratification is the process of simulating natural conditions, specifically with like temperature and moisture, in order to trigger germination for a certain species. I want to add the information that not all species require this. Sometimes it is just as simple as toss it in the ground and see what happens. But these are processes you have to consider, especially depending on the species that you grow. So we're going to start with scarification because if you're going to do it, it likely needs to happen first. And this is a process that can happen a couple of different ways, generally chemically or mechanically. Hot water is a great way to do it by soaking seed in hot water. It actually will help wear down that seed coat a bit and get the seed to imbibe water, so that way germination can be triggered. And another method that we've been exploring here in the seed bank is acid. We realize that's not safely attainable for everybody, but here at Holden, as Annie mentioned, we're really lucky to have a robust research department that happened to have some acid lying around so we could try it. And we'll see what those results look like of using acid to kind of break down that seed coat a bit. Mechanical methods include using rocks. I know some people will actually run seeds over gravel. You can even use a knife and manually like nick each seed. It just depends on the seed that you're using and what works for you. When you're thinking about scarification, I really want to recommend that you think about the natural process that you're trying to mimic. So think about things like digestion, or when something eats a fruit and passes the seed, or thinking about how seed ends up being dispersed and being scraped over rocks or running through water, things like that that would naturally damage that seed coat to trigger this process. Species that commonly need scarification, generally we see it a lot with legumes or just any other species that have a tough seed coat. So here in our picture where we're doing our acid scarification, we're actually using Tilia americana or basswood because they have a really thick, tough seed coat and they're notoriously difficult to consistently cultivate. So we're going to try it out and we'll see what happens. And moving on to stratification, again, this is the part where we're talking about temperature fluctuations, and the method that we utilize for doing this usually involves mixing together some sort of medium to store the seeds in. In this, lately, we've been using sand. We also use some peat. It depends, just whatever materials you have around work for you. We use sand because we have a lot of it. Generally, stratification occurs in a moist environment. The most that we have worked with is cold, moist stratification. And again, all of this information is really species specific, so make sure that you have an understanding of the needs of your species prior. And here in this picture, we have some acorns that are stratifying in sand media. So again, acorns are recalcitrant, which means we cannot dry and store them for a long time. So what we ended up doing was keeping them in cold storage until we were ready to stratify them. And we packed them in this medium and kept them moist. And we've actually been able to see them germinate and have been growing them up. I do also want to say that while we are doing this and mimicking the process of stratification, you can also stratify things within their growing environment. Doing it this way is just a little bit more controlled. And once you've completed all of your pre-germination treatments, you're ready to actually move on to propagation. And with that, I am going to pass this back to Kim, who's going to tell you all about a bunch of different propagation methods.
Mute. Let's see. Can everybody hear me okay? Amazing. Thanks, Valerie. Okay, thank you so much for all of that, Valerie. Everybody, I'm just going to take the last few minutes of our webinar together to tell you, to share a little bit about what I know about propagating native plants from seed, and then to show you a little bit about what we're doing at Holden. I do want to emphasize and kind of go back to my explanation in the beginning of this critical need for native plants of local ecotype to meet reforestation and restoration. At the Seed Bank, we are working with organizations and government agencies and native nurseries in Northeast Ohio to make this a reality, as well as private landowners as well. At Holden, while we would love to be able to grow the billions of trees that we need for restoration, that's just simply not feasible. And so really, when it comes to propagating plants from seed to meet these needs, it is going to be about those collaborative relationships and the network that we are building over in the state of Ohio. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about a few things about propagation. The first thing I want to start with is something called the factors that limit growth. So as you start your journey or continue your journey of propagating plants, your job is to create an environment that is suitable for plant growth. Growth is going to happen naturally, no matter what. Your job is to try to increase the rate of that growth as much as possible. And there are going to be so many different environmental conditions that are going to try to restrict your plants from growing at a rate that you desire. And so your task at hand is to try to eliminate those factors either in the beginning or during propagation. Technologically illiterate over here this morning. Let's see, how do I advance a slide for you all? There we go. Okay, so I created this image on the right hand of your screen to kind of show you a little bit about what I mean when I say factors that limit growth. So you will have factors above and below the soil. You will have things that you can control. There might be too much of something. There might be too little of something. It's important to note that more than one factor can be affecting the rate of growth at a given time. They can be sequential, they can be cumulative, and it's possible that once you satisfy one of these factors, another one is going to show itself. So things that you will be playing with as you construct your own propagation environment. You will be considering the light, full sun, partial shade. Do seeds need light to germinate? Do they need darkness? You will be playing with temperature, humidity, and you'll also be monitoring pathogenic fungi that could be occurring. You'll be trying to ward off insects, pests, any other diseases that might occur. And then once your seeds have been sown and your plants are growing, you will also be monitoring their water intake and their mineral nutrients, and again, insects and pests and diseases that may or may not be occurring beneath the soil level. Here are some images. The two left images are actually taken from Tree Pittsburgh, which is a nonprofit organization in Pittsburgh, and they are completely dedicated to growing trees for the city of Pittsburgh. They have a really incredible operation, and I went and I toured it a year ago to kind of see what it looks like to scale up to meet the needs of urban canopy restoration. I showed you these images just because I want to show you about some of these factors, and I thought they would be really good images for you guys to potentially implement in your own growing spaces, assuming that you're all private landowners, woodland owners in some capacity. The right-hand image is our newly constructed polyhouse growing space for the seed bank. She looks small, but she's mighty. And we just finished installing the ground cloth a couple of weeks ago. And we have some growing benches and that walnut that I showed you at the beginning of this presentation is definitely located over there on that right-hand side. But just going ahead to take a look at some of these structures, you can see that we are monitoring the light, we are monitoring the temperature. The structure on the right-hand side does not have the exhaust fans, or excuse me, the ventilation fans installed yet, but they will be to help monitor humidity and the temperature inside. The image in the middle, I love the most for all of you because for two reasons. Number one, those are custom-built raised beds, and they're actually trenched inside the ground a little bit. And that is to help with those winter temperatures. You can see that they're in the ground and then they're like really smothered with a lot of mulch. And then on top of those raised beds, you will see that there are screen protectors to prevent wildlife from coming in and attacking your crop. When I toured Treats Pittsburgh, they told me that they had 7,000 acorns in one of those beds and then 7,000 hickories in another. And so this is a really good way to optimize your space and to have a little bit more control of your propagation environment. Okay, taking a look, things worth noting here. I love these containers on the left-hand side for the at-home propagator. It's a really good way to monitor your humidity and your temperature. Sometimes certain seeds, at least in my world of experience, especially those for like your annuals, your perennials, your herbaceous materials, or your food crops, they love being contained in an environment like this. It really helps with the process of germination. I'll talk more about that image in the middle in a second. And then on the right-hand side, I just want to take a second to note that when you are in the business of having many different plants that you are monitoring for growth, you want to do your best to manage against disease and pests. And so making sure that you have adequate spacing between all of your plants and your containers is going to be really important. Okay, so let's dive into the propagation methods. So a propagule is any plant part that can be used to produce another plant. And in the world of propagation, folks will either do this with seed or they will do this with cuttings. And there are pros and cons to both. There are benefits to both. And native nurseries typically will use both. And it really just depends on the species. Oftentimes, depending on what species you're working with, it might be a little tricky to cultivate that from seed. As Valerie mentioned earlier, their dormancy may be tricky to break. So there's that. And also there are some species that are not going to produce a reliable seed crop year after year. So somebody might want to just take cuttings because that's more reliable. However, the one thing that we want to know as we put our seed bank hats on and our restoration hats is that we really want to promote native plant materials, yes, of local ecotype, but also native plant materials that are genetically diverse. And so by taking cuttings, you're essentially taking a clonal replicate of whatever that mother plant is. So for the sake of the few slides ahead, I'm going to focus on seeds. I also just want to double check that we're okay on time, Marnie. You can drop something in the chat, like a thumbs up, thumbs down, or whatever you prefer.
You're all good. Yeah, you're doing great.
Okay,
Plenty of time.
Amazing. Great. Thanks, everybody. Okay, yeah, so we're going to focus on seeds for the sake of conversation. And I guess I'll start with talking about the two different methods that one may use in their woodland space for propagation. You have the direct seeding method, and then you have container growing. And again, it really is going to depend on the species and that you're working with and what you're hoping to achieve in your space, because there is going to be certain areas of your land where you are going to want to direct seed. It's going to be easier that way based on the plant material that you're working with. And then there's a whole other world of container growing, and container growing is a little bit different. You have higher survival rates. You have a little bit more control over your space. Again, when you think about those factors of limiting growth, you can really kind of put your hands on top of that and control that in some capacity. By using containers, you can tack a few weeks on the end of your season and have a longer planting window. And of course, as mentioned, you can protect from predators a little bit more, not all the time. It's still going to be us against the chipmunks at the end of the day when it comes to tree species for the most part. But compared to direct seeding, where you might direct sow a large area of space, you're not really going to be able to protect from predators as much as you would in a controlled environment. Benefits of direct seeding, of course, it's lower cost, less labor intensive. You don't have to shock your plants when you start the process of transplanting. And again, it's going to be really good for those quick species. So I'm going to guide us into the world of container growing, just because I imagine that a lot of folks in this webinar are potentially thinking about starting an operation like that in some capacity. So there's two things that you're really going to think about once you've created this propagation environment. You want to think about your containers. So what are you going to grow in? And you want to think about your growing media. What are you going to use to actually grow plants? You need the nutrients, you need water retention, so on and so forth. The one thing that I want to stress to all of you as you begin your propagation journey is to really keep in mind the root binding that may or may not occur in your container growing operation. Our job as growers is to prevent something like this image from happening. So roots have a lot of really important benefits to a plant. They are anchoring the plant in place. They are providing against environmental stressors, but really it's the lifeline of the plant. That root system is what is taking up water and nutrients and allowing that plant to continue its growth above soil. Oftentimes, plants may or may not be in containers. Plants may be in containers for way too long, and that causes the roots to really bind. So it's not uncommon for practitioners to plant trees or shrubs or even herbaceous plant materials where they have like a really thick root binding system. And then 10, 15, maybe even 20 years down the line, these plants are starting to slowly die off. And that's because that root system has accidentally swallowed itself, so to speak. And so when you're thinking about containers, just always keep in mind that this is a really crucial part of your propagation journey. You want to prevent something like this from happening. I would like to take a few moments to go over the different container types because each one is going to have a different purpose based on the species that you're growing. So right here, you will see tubes, commonly called forestry tubes in some capacity, and these are really good for grasses and sedges. They're also really good for other herbaceous native plant materials. You can't see it from this image, but generally I will say 4 to 6 inches in length. And so they do have the opportunity for roots to grow pretty well. And the roots will be growing down versus hopefully not binding around each other. We don't love tubes for something like trees because trees will generally send out a really long taproot. And the moment that that taproot has kind of come into an obstruction is when it'll start winding around itself. So tubes are really good. They have a certain place and time. There's also flats. I don't have an image in here now. These are pretty shallow flats, but they have a place and a time, of course. There's also really, there's longer flats, so to speak. So you can have something just like this that might have 4 inches in length. And then finally, there's also, oops, I guess I kept this slide in for you guys for good reason. And that's really to show you guys that there are a bunch of different sizes of flats. The previous image I just showed you were 50-celled flats. You can have 72, 128. These little ones right here, these are 288-celled flats. And it's really going to depend on what your goals are for your growing spaces and what you want to incorporate. The bigger the cell, the longer the plant can stay in there. So these 288-celled flats, to me, my guess is that these are having a really quick in and out cycle in this propagation space. Plants are getting started and they're probably getting outplanted really quickly. Other fun things that we love about flats, though, is that you can do some underneath watering with really large watering trays. And then it's important to note that based on the size of that cell, they're going to have different watering requirements. So they might be drying out quicker if the cell is a little bit smaller. These are some trays. You'll notice that the one on the left is maybe a little bit deeper than the one on the right in this image. This is what we use at Holden to propagate a lot of our tree and shrub species. And we like this for a few reasons. Number one, like I mentioned, they're deeper, so we have some room for that root to really expand and grow. We also love this because you can fit a lot of seed in these spaces. Typically, we fit about 50 acorns in the tray on the left-hand side. I've personally done about 25 walnuts. Those are obviously a bigger seed, and I was getting a little bit nervous about spacing, but you can really optimize your space. The thing about using trays like this, 2 more things on that note, is that in terms of root binding, it's not going to happen like it would in a contained cell. So the roots can spread around, but once the tree or the shrub is starting to show X number of true leaves, you really want to get them out of there and get them into a new container. Another thing that one can do, forgot I had another beautiful image for you. Right here we have some northern red oak acorns on our left-hand side that were collected in 2024. And this is an example of what it looks like to put 50 acorns in a tray. We've done both methods of actually putting the acorn underneath the soil, so to speak, and then another one of our colleagues from the Conservation and Community Forestry Department actually recommended that we start placing our acorns on top of the soil. So we are experimenting with both to see if they have any difference in the rate of germination, the root development, so on and so forth. Here's another progression. These are some black walnuts. Again, these are some of the first seed that we collected in 2023 as the seed bank facility. This is that beautiful little seedling germinating. Isn't it hard to separate the trees in those containers? That's a great question. It's all about timing, and I'm really glad that you brought this up. I'll go back to this image real quick. This is surprisingly actually not that hard. It's a gentle process. You want to make sure that, so as you can see, some of these leaves right here, there's like 2, 4, maybe they're getting their 6th true leaf. This is a good time to start thinking about transplanting those into a larger container. But right now, I'm not worried that their roots are super bound together just yet. It's a gentle massaging. Once they get bigger, you will be fighting against that root growth, but it's not too hard, believe it or not. Same thing with these walnuts. There's that first emergence, which was a really big day in the seed bank world over here. It was proof of concept of collecting thousands and thousands of trees and storing them and stratifying and suddenly starting to have them emerge from the soil. And then over here on the right-hand side is what it looks like when we have all of those black walnuts emerging from trays. There's also individual pots, which again, they have a place and they have a time, and it really depends on the species. I would say, just shooting from the cuff here, if you were to grow any tree species, I would not recommend any of these. Maybe the two on the far left, but still at some point they would outgrow that container pretty quickly. But I love these for herbaceous materials and some shrubs. I also want to note that there is a lot of work being done in the world of cow pots. And so these are 3 different cow pot examples. They're pretty sturdy. And we love them for a few reasons. You can plant them directly into your space, and they're compostable. And so it really removes a lot of that waste. What I want to say about all of those different pots and trays thus far is that it's a really good opportunity for folks to get a little creative in their propagation environments. I would encourage everybody to look for DIY options, or repurposed options more so. I don't know exactly if nurseries are in the business of offloading these to folks, but sometimes it is possible, or potentially there are community gardens or urban farms or other really big nurseries, and they just have an abundance of pots and they're not using them anymore. So it's a really good place to try to repurpose some of what's already out there, instead of investing in all of this brand new stuff. So these are those air pruning containers that I mentioned earlier, and these are root maker pots. And these are, I would say that in the world of tree and shrub cultivation and propagation, these are kind of the leading technique being used right now. You will notice that it's a little spiky, and each one of those spikes has a hole. You can see the growing media through that hole right there. It does exactly what it sounds like it does. Once the roots start going out to the when they start touching the container, and they come into contact with air, they are naturally pruning themselves and the root stops growing. And so that's giving the root an opportunity to just continually build up its root mass, because once it starts to hit that container, it just kind of stops instead of binding. So as we continue to expand our propagation, and as we continue to partner with other nurseries and other growers who have capacity to meet these needs of restoration, we will really be looking for techniques like this, because we want those healthy root masses. We want those healthy native plant materials to be used in restoration. Okay, so that's a little bit about containers. I'm just going to take a slide or two to chat about growing media. Growing media is technically considered different than soil. Soil is really dense, like gardening soil. Typically, something that you might find readily available in your space is going to be. Yes, definitely. Thanks, Christy. Christy just mentioned that if you are going to repurpose old pots, they should be cleaned and sanitized. Absolutely. So going to growing media, soil is really dense, and it really it's not against soil. I said that like I was an anti-soil person. I certainly am not. But for the sake of growing things from seed, you want something that's a little bit lighter. You want something that's more porous for well-draining purposes. And then, of course, you want something that you could potentially add nutrients to, or slow-releasing fertilizers. You want something that you can potentially add something like lime to your mix so that you can modify the pH based on native species requirements, so on and so forth. But essentially, growing media is using organic and inorganic materials to make a blend for starting seeds. One of our most common mixes at Holden, we call it a bark mix. It's a really good portion of this mix is wood chips. And then we use a little bit of sphagnum peat moss to help with water retention. And then we have ingredients like perlite and vermiculite on hand, and that is for aeration. And then we do add lime to our mixes to make our mixes less acidic. I do want to note that in the world of native plants and in the nursery industry, sphagnum peat moss is widely used. But there is a lot of work being done to find an alternative to that, because I'm sure, as most of you know, the harvesting of peat moss is very unsustainable. And so there's a lot of people who are working to try to figure out an alternative to that. So I'm going to go ahead and do my best to do a virtual how-to for propagation, even though I would love to do a hands-on demonstration with everybody here. So here we go in a virtual version of that. So step one, of course, as Valerie just walked all of us through this, you want to collect, process, and store your seeds in some capacity. This is some black walnuts from our Pearson Creek Valley Trail, I believe. And then here are some volunteers processing them. I do want to note that we do not hand trim all of our black walnuts. I did actually experiment with the large scale processing 2 years ago. I grabbed a colleague sent me a video via YouTube, and I grabbed a bunch of hula hoops and I put them in our parking lot after I let the black walnuts ferment and rot for a really long time. So their seed coats, that husk was like really mushy. And then I dumped hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of walnuts into these hula hoops. And then we did drive over them with our Kubota to really just kind of like move all of that mushy husk material off. And then we grabbed all of those walnuts, put them in our deep basin, and then used a really high power sprayer to spray the remaining off. And it significantly cut down the time of seed processing, which is kind of the name of the game when you're doing something to scale, like what we're doing at Holden. Step two, so you've processed, you've collected, you want to perform any pre-germination treatments that you may need to have. So there are some species, as Valerie mentioned, they need warm and cold. Many times it might just be a cold. So do your pre-germination treatments. Step three, clean your containers and prepare your media. It is very important. No matter what it is that you are propagating, a good rule of thumb is to always clean your containers in some capacity. I've seen some folks do like a soap and a water and a scrubbing and then a really quick dunk in bleach, which is a pretty good way to go. Here at Holden, we do have an entire like integrated pest management plan, and my colleague who is in charge of that, I don't know specifically what she uses, but she has moved away from the cleaning and the scrubbing and the bleaching, and has a pretty industrial spray that she uses. But either way, you want to clean to prevent against transferable diseases. Over here, we make all of our mix in-house at Holden, and this is a big bin of that bark mix that I described to you earlier. Step four, sow your seeds. That's what you will see on the right-hand side. Again, with different species, it really depends if you are going to do that surface sowing method, or if you're going to submerge that seed underneath the soil. I would encourage folks to experiment with both. Of course, if you are going to make those acorns readily available to the chipmunk's eye, just be prepared to protect against them. And then the transplanting of seedlings will have to occur at some point. Right here, you will see a member from our conservation team demonstrating where we put a tree seedling when we are transplanting it. So you will see the soil. What you can't see is that this container that he is transplanting in is maybe like a foot to 2 feet. Maybe we'll say a foot. And so that is pretty, not fully compacted soil, but like, you know, we've tapped it, we've shaken it, we feel pretty good about the soil, but we haven't pressed it down. And then that soil, so he has taken that red oak acorn and he's gently placing that just at the top of the soil. And you can see where that yellow part of the stem is. We are going to put soil right back on top and kind of go back to where that soil level was on the stem, if that makes sense. Ta-da, that's what she looks like. So that is a northern red oak acorn on the left-hand side. And then the right-hand side, this is once we've moved all of those acorns into our polytunnel growing space. You'll notice that we do try to put a little bit of spacing in between all of our plants. Again, we're preventing against pest and disease with that. And then, of course, watering in. I have a few more slides for you all, so just bear with me. Not much longer. How much should I water? Watering is an art and a science in and of itself. At some point, Valerie and I would love to send a follow-up email to all of you attending today, and we have a really good resource on how to know how much to water. So I will make sure to include that in our list of materials. It's going to be seasonally dependent on how much you water, 1 to 3 times per week. It's going to depend on your containers. You don't want to overwater. You certainly don't want things to dry out. There is a balance and a dance that you can dance when it comes to not letting your crop dry out, so to speak, but keeping water from it just enough to help that root system really go and search for water. There's a theory behind that. You can have a variety of different hand watering systems using a watering can, a hose, a spray nozzle. I've seen a few folks implement overhead irrigations into their growing operations, depending on how big or how creative they are. Depending on your seed and your species, you might have to start with a misting system for those really fine seeds. And then, of course, one of my favorite is the bottom watering techniques. But again, with watering, you want to be keeping in mind any disease transfer that you may have. Same thing, fertilizing. How and when should this happen? Here at Holden, we do like to fertilize all of our plants, whether they are cultivars or native plants for propagation. We have done a few experiments comparing and contrasting plants that have been fertilized and have not. You don't have to, but you are welcome to, and we recommend it. And you can do this with organic or conventional methods. Personally, in my life, I'm a big fan of compost always and forever. So that is an option, or you could add nutrients manually. That's not my expertise, but I think by the end of this growing season, it will be. So you want to start fertilizing after true leaves appear. Again, this is going to be one of those things when you think of factors of limiting growth. If you want to help control the rate of growth and you want it to be faster, fertilizing is going to be your friend. You can add slow release fertilizers to the growing media when you mix that. You can top dress throughout the season, or you could do some fertigating, which is the liquid feeding throughout the season as well. I believe this might be one of my last slides for all of you. How can you prepare for pests and diseases? You can do your absolute best to put things in place to prevent against these two things. One of our colleagues at Holden is starting to work with beneficial insects. In fact, they are growing beneficial insects to scale to meet the needs of all of our poly houses on site, which is pretty exciting. Those beneficial insects are being reared, that's the word I was looking for. Those are being reared to attack all of those common seedling pests that you may see throughout your propagating experience. So the aphids, the fungus gnats, not so much slugs. You also can do a little bit of disease prevention, so proper spacing, having good air circulation in your growing spaces, and then again, preventative measures like cleaning your tools, having sterilized media, cleaning your containers and sterilizing those as well. I think that's everything I want to virtually teach you all about propagating in some capacity. What I want to do is shift gears to a call to action. How can you get involved? You can definitely get involved with the seed bank in any one of the stages that we have mentioned today. Same with Working Woods. By volunteering, always and forever. That's a great way to get involved. But we are also looking for other folks who want to get involved on a deeper level. We are in the process of building a regional seed collection program in Northeast Ohio, but also in the state of Ohio and beyond, to meet the needs of genetic diversity and to meet the needs of the seed needs that we need for restoration. It's really going to take a collaborative network. So if you are with an organization or you are a private landowner and there's some way that you can see yourself contributing in some capacity, we encourage you to reach out in some regard. I don't have anything for you today, but Valerie and I are going to curate a form to help guide folks as they want to get involved. So hopefully we'll be able to send that out to you guys next week with our resources. I'm going to go ahead and leave this slide up for a second just because it does have all of our email addresses. I think Annie wants to jump on and maybe tell y'all about a really fun thing happening in June. I think that's all I have to say for you guys. So I'm going to pass it on to Annie. And I
Thank
thank
you,
you all for
Anne.
your time.
Thank you. That was great. So much information, so helpful. Um, I hope that was helpful for all of you. Um, like Kim mentioned, there are lots of ways. Oh, did I do that? Let me go back. There we go. There are lots of ways to connect with the seed bank or with the Working Woods Hub. If you have any questions about some of the things that I mentioned at the beginning about consulting forestry or visiting the demonstration forest that we have up here, please send me an email. It's listed right there. We also have our biggest annual event, which is coming up on June 7th. It's our field day where we invite natural resource professionals and landowners to come out, tour the woods, talk to people, ask their questions. There's a morning session and an afternoon session. So that should be great. Definitely consider coming to that. I will be there. Kim and Valerie will be there, and we can answer any questions that you have about the seed bank or anything else going on. Okay. I assume it's time for the Q&A. Marnie, do you have anything to say before we jump into that?
No, we can jump right in, and I can kind of facilitate the questions for you all, and we'll just kind of work our way through. And folks, feel free to continue to add your questions to the Q&A or click the little thumbs up so we can prioritize those questions. Okay, so William is asking, how is the amount of the reforestation acres available determined in the 2020 study?
That is a good question. I don't have an answer for that. How is the acreage determined? I don't have an answer for that, but I will be sure to look that up and share it in the resources.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Laura's asking, will the collection of only Northeast Ohio seed make sure that Northeast Ohio has the trees for climate change?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that one. So it kind of depends on your purpose. And Kim, I mean, feel free to add anything, but that's kind of what I mentioned, like what I was trying to get at with the seed zones, that some practitioners are strategically moving seed northward in the face of climate change to make sure that seed is being moved into colder climates so that those species can kind of continue and extend their range up there. So while our focus is to collect local ecotype seed, there's seed being collected for a number of purposes.
And then, so Frank asked later on about ecotone, kind of asking if it was a major factor for trees, the forests would never have moved north after the glaciers melted. Do you want to comment on that?
Oh, is it this one, like, is ecotype really that important? Um, It's our goal here at the seed bank to collect ecotype, but there's a lot, it's a big conversation. So I think for the purpose of the presentation today, we wanted to talk about like our focus and what we're doing, but there are some people in restoration that also advocate for the ability of planting seeds that have been adapted to other environments, or especially if you're restoring a degraded environment, there are people that recommend a combination of both. So I wouldn't say that ecotype is the only way forward, but right now that's the gap that we're trying to fill in our resources available.
Great, thank you. And then Frank also mentioned the new nursery that ODNR established. I would assume that you're working with some of those folks and kind of sharing ideas and things like that.
Yeah, we're really hoping to. That was really exciting actually when it was about a year ago that the ODNR's nursery was back up and running. And so that was really exciting. We had a conversation with them also about a year ago, but they were just getting started. And so we're really hoping to kind of serve as a seed source for that native tree nursery. Yeah, which is really exciting.
Yeah. Okay. Sheila's
Good
asking,
morning.
oh yeah, go ahead.
Just, I see one in here on reviewing the collection and the processing, and I'm going to stick in the chat the link for the woody plant seed manual that you can pull up any tree species you want, and it'll talk about how to collect, when to collect, how to stratify, all that good stuff. So
Was that the one on black walnuts, the question?
yeah, I'm gonna
Yeah,
put
okay.
that in there.
Yeah. So
So
Harold, definitely check that one out.
yeah.
Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. That's definitely one of our favorite resources that we rely on a lot.
It's nice that it's online so everybody can
know.
access it.
We can also link it to the recording of this as well. So we can add it to the resources that you all send us as well. So it's all in one spot.
Perfect.
Okay. Sheila is asking, do you air dry the seeds in trays or use heat?
In trays, we generally don't use heat. I mean, there are sometimes processes that people use where they will use heat to dry seeds, typically to get at like what the exact moisture content is, but generally just air drying in our environment.
And then is it, let's see. Oh, we have a couple questions on cow pots. Can you explain what a cow pot is?
Oh, good question. Can I explain what a cow pot is, or do I just use them? Oh my gosh, it's been so long since I went down the road of figuring out what exactly a pot is. But what I can speak to you is that it is a naturally biodegradable pot that you can start seeds in. And it's been designed to try to alleviate some of this plastic usage that is really popular in the agriculture and nursery industries. The goal of a cow pot is that you would start your seed in this, you would water it, it would grow, the roots would kind of naturally bind with the cow pot, so to speak. And then you should be able to just plant it entirely in the soil. I've done both in my own spaces. I've like planted the cow pot and it's worked pretty well. I've also, as you can imagine, after weeks and weeks of watering it, it does start to kind of naturally disintegrate and become really malleable. So sometimes it is easy to just like remove that material. Whether it goes in the ground or in your own compost bin, either way, it is compostable. And so it's a really good alternative. I'm going to guess, I don't want to guess, but I'm going to say cowpot surely means something from manure related. I shouldn't say that without knowing for sure.
That would also be my assumption, but well, if you, I don't know if you're looking it up, it looks like you're searching. So we'll move on to another. You
I
can always jump in, or we can look it up ourselves. I'm sure there's info out there.
composted cow manure. That's
There you
exactly
go.
what we think it is. I wanted to lead with that, but now I know for sure.
Composted cow manure. All right. Let's see. Is it preferred to remove the husk from black walnut when planting, not storing?
You know, I've only done it with removal of the husk. I have not actually ever experimented with just planting that entire green seed as is. What I know to be somewhat true is I do believe that like squirrels and chipmunks naturally in a forested area will eat away at that husk. Correct me if I'm wrong there. And so I think they naturally will help remove that coat in the forested space, and then they will bury that as a food source, or maybe it just is like on top of the soil. That's a good question, and maybe something worth experimenting with.
Yeah,
As
just trying to
far as
mimic.
I know, with woodland owners that have done it, they've done it both ways and still had good success either way.
I can see based on like the concept of just kind of like removing the husk and the entire process that we went through for that. I can see it just being probably okay to sow as is.
Liza's asking, what set the protocol or standard of collecting 20% of the available seed? Does this fluctuate based off the seed mast?
I'll try to tack some information onto this, but Kim, feel free to chime in as well.
Sure.
I think that 20% is just kind of like it's part of that protocol that we implemented into our practices, the seeds of success. I think that's just kind of like the practice standard to make sure that based on like viability amounts and of different seed, to make sure that we're collecting seed that will serve our purposes, but that we're not taking too much from what's actually viable and able to be regenerated in the environment. In terms of like dependent on mast, it, I mean, kind of. I mean, you're gonna want to take 20% of whatever is there anyway. If it's like an unusually like low year, if there's not a lot to collect, it's probably better to collect less. Because again, we want to make sure that we're collecting sustainably and not doing damage to wild populations.
The only thing I would add to that is just certain seeds being food sources for wildlife and not wanting to take away from the function of the ecosystem.
Okay. Laura's asking, will the collect? Oh no, we already answered that. Sorry, I didn't clear that one. Who do you need to get a seed collection permit from?
Good question. I would say seed collection permits are a case-by-case basis, and it's going to be from the person who technically owns the land. So even if we wanted to work with private landowners to collect seed from their spaces, we would still need some form of a written permit in place. If you were to collect from If you were to want to collect from an organization, for example, like the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, they have 12,000 acres of different natural areas. We would have to obtain a permit from them. Similarly, like the Summit Metro Parks, they have a pretty positive permitting process in place to make it so that folks can collect seed from their areas.
Jonathan says, I work in a large wildlife area, Appalachian Hills, and I'm wondering if growing seeds in media similar to the mining soil would help to grow plants better adapted to the environment. And then he said, in addition to this question, would it be better to artificially replicate this soil with various bought media, or to take some of that soil and add it with media to promote growth?
Ooh, that is a good question. I love that question. And I don't know the best way to answer it or if there is an ethical answer. So I don't want to misspeak on like you cannot just be taking soil from certain spaces. But I would say like if you are growing native plants from seed of a specific region, trying to mimic that soil type would be best. Yeah.
James is asking what the cold storage temperature and RH were again.
For cold storage, the temperature I think that I had, it was about 41 degrees Fahrenheit or 5 degrees Celsius. But honestly, in terms of keeping our stock here in the seed bank cold, anything that you're just a refrigerator that you can buy from the store can do. By nature, in a cold environment, it's going to be less humid because cold air can't hold as much moisture. So as low humidity as possible, generally around like 15 to 20%, but sometimes that's not that feasible. So generally, as long as it's like our maximum for our ambient conditions is usually around like 40% relative humidity. So anything less than that.
Thank you. And then I think this is our last question. Jason is asking, is it right that you want to air dry seedlings? Is it right that you want to air dry seedlings, keeping them cold and dry for storage, but when you are ready to plant the seeds, you might add some moisture to stratify the seeds for a time before planting? Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, yes, that is correct. If you have an orthodox seed and you want to store it and you're not ready to plant it, you can dry it, seal it up, put it in your cold space. So again, a refrigerator. And then when you want to stratify it for some seeds want to be stratified for 2 months, some want to be a month, some also want to be cold stratified for 3 months. Really what you're doing there is you are trying to break that dormancy. So yes, you're adding moisture, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the seed's going to grow right away. It still needs a long time in that cold, wet space before the dormancy breaks. Yeah, I will just also add that sometimes with recalcitrant seeds, like acorns, for example, before we sow those, we like to soak those for overnight just to kind of give them a little bit of a boost before they start their growing process.
All right. Well, I think we got through all the questions. Valerie, Kimberly, Annie, thank you guys so much. This was really interesting. Have some great comments in the chat. Be sure to check those out. Folks, continue to thank our speakers. We really appreciate your time. I'm going to stop the recording and Kathy will post the link for continuing education credits. So thank you all again so much.